unrelenting disaster. Recessions are inevitable for two key reasons, and the first is economic interconnectedness. Young of the Royal Economics Institute explained that because global economies are becoming more interconnected, a recession in one country often creates a domino effect in another. She concludes that because the global economy is not under the control of any one body, recessions are becoming increasingly inevitable. The second is bubbles. Harambe of the Journal of Theoretical and Applied Economics writes that financial crises are an inevitable feature of the capitalist system, as any increased profit opportunities in one sector of the economy often creates an explosion in investment. However, as investors realize the market has reached a maximum and attempt to transform their overvalued assets into cash or other assets, more and more investors join in, causing a collapse in prices, therefore bursting the bubble. The Precio of Investopedia explains that these bubbles have cascading effects throughout an economy, causing economic recessions. Ultimately, this is why the AIER concludes that recessions are a permanent and inevitable aspect of the economic landscape. Unfortunately, high debt makes recessions harder to recover from for two major reasons, and the first is bonds. The American bond system is one of the largest sources of paying off debt. Stelter 16 of U.S. News found that when bond sales are steady, the rest of the market follows suit and becomes steady. Unfortunately, as the federal debt is rising, Goodkin 18 of Newsweek found that investment into American bonds is reaching an all-time low. In fact, it has steadily decreased since 2008 following the massive influx of debt. Goodkind thus concludes that foreign unwillingness to buy U.S. debt will move beyond increased domestic purchasing and into a financial crisis. This is why the quick sell-off method is going to prevent the U.S. government from responding to a recession. This is why Collins concludes that the next recession will be much longer and more painful. The second way is because debt reduces government stimulus. Collins furthers that in 2008, the government had relatively minimal debt and thus could direct many of its financial resources into a stimulus package to help rescue the economy. However, high debt changes this response. As the Pearson Foundation explains, that as federal debt increases, the government will spend more of its budget on interest costs, increasingly crowding out public investments. The trend of the status quo is incredibly problematic, as Bixby of Brookings explains that due to the increasing amount of money being accumulated as debt, absent change, by 2030, all federal government revenue will be needed to just pay for interest payments and mandatory spending. This is incredibly damaging, as the Peterson Foundation furthers that this limits the ability of the U.S. to respond to recessions effectively. Empirically, Princeton economist Alan Blinder estimates that without the stimulus package of 2008, the economy would have shrunk by 14% rather than the actual 4%, and more than twice as many jobs would have been lost. This is why Cannon finds that a recession with low government consumption would take twice as long to recover from. The impacts are threefold, and the first is American poverty. Recessions have enormous impacts in both the short-term and the long-term, and in the immediate aftermath. Semple 13 of IU writes that 3 million people fall into poverty every year after a recession. Crucially, Harvard University economics professor Karen Dian argued that the recession of 2008 undid savings and investments from 20 years prior to the recession, overall meaning that recessions resets economic growth. The second is impact of worldwide poverty. In the immediate aftermath following the 2008 recession, the ILO concluded that 50 million people fell into poverty around the globe. Evans of Reuters explains that recessions increase global poverty rates by up to 6%, and it gets worse, as the ILO found that while unemployment in developed countries skyrockets following recessions, the burden disproportionately falls on those who are already poor. The third impact is long-term instability. Sarah of the IMF writes that according to traditional economic theory, poor countries should catch up to the income levels of rich countries. However, under extended recessions, poor countries suffer much longer, as it is harder for them to recover lost investments, resulting in little sustainable growth for developing countries. This is incredibly damaging, as the World Bank explains that 736 million people live in extreme poverty in the developing world. To preserve the stability and help the poor, reaffirm.
Negate the resolution. We observed that according to Krugman of Princeton in 2015, there is no upward ceiling to U.S. debt, and in fact, the debt ceiling is raised once every 8 months for 3 reasons. First, according to Grover Firm in 2015, despite the ballooning deficit, investors will continue to loan America money because they know the U.S. can produce more dollars to meet its debt obligations if absolutely necessary. Second, America defaulting on its loans can cause a global economic catastrophe, so neither investors nor foreign countries will hike up their interest rates. This is why Applebaum of the New York Times explains in 2017, the U.S. can always borrow more to keep financing its debt. Third, foresaw the IMF writes in 2014 that because the dollar is used in international financial transactions, countries will always continue to lend American money as a way of obtaining dollars for themselves, because they can buy bonds in their own currency and receive dollars when they are paid back. With this in mind, our first contention is bailouts. Along with the Washington Post reports last month, the U.S. will likely enter a recession come 2020, the worst economic outlook since November 2008. In fact, Bryn of the New York Post warns in 2018 that if mishandled, this crisis will be worse than the Great Depression. During recessions, the government promotes economic growth with bailouts to failing businesses and struggling households. However, Elliott of the LMM reports in 2018, these bailouts are also substantially increased the deficit. Thus, affirming and prioritizing reducing the debt over programs like bailouts which promote economic growth will leave the U.S. defenseless in the face of the next recession. In 2008, for example, because they bail out economically sustained banks, businesses, and households, Blinder Princeton writes in 2015, without the bailout, the recession would have been twice as long, growth would have been 10% lower, and unemployment would have increased by 6% more, leaving 8.5 million Americans without jobs. Caveman of U.S. Council explains this increase translates to a 7% increase in poverty. Historically, Coppola of Forbes writes in 2018 that Europe's prioritization of reducing the debt and promoting the economy prevented critical government action during the 2008 recession, causing a decade-long slump with double-digit unemployment rates, throwing away an entire generation's future in the name of balanced budgets. Our second contention is foreign aid. Foreign aid promotes economic growth but also contributes to our debt, meaning in a world where we prioritize reducing our debt and promoting our growth, foreign aid will be cut. Indeed, Gates explained in 2017, aid improves productivity and provides the capital needed to sustain growth. And as a result, Acevedo of the Chicago Policy Review quantified in 2017, a 1% increase in foreign aid increases the GDP of the recipient country by 0.3%. Moreover, the US GLC explained in 2016, because foreign aid strengthens foreign economies as well, it creates new trade partners for the United States, thus bolstering the American economy. In fact, of America's top 15 trade partners, 11 were former aid recipients. However, Amadeo of the Balance reports in 2018, decreasing government spending is the only way to reduce the national debt, since tax hikes are a death sentence for politicians' hopes of re-election. Unfortunately, when budgets get cut, aid is first on the chopping block for two reasons. First, according to Harris v. Morgan Project, Trump's belief in America first sidelines the needs of other countries, when Trump already plans to cut foreign aid by 31% to reduce the deficit. Second, politicians must answer the will of the people for re-election. And Rampel of the Washington Post reports in 2017 that 46% of voters believe that foreign aid contributes a great deal to the national debt, whereas only 18% believe the same about social spending. Moreover, Nazi of the Atlantic reports in 2017, policymakers will always cut foreign aid first when they have to, because American neighbors don't bear the consequences as they do with domestic spending cuts. Cutting foreign aid harms the world in two ways. First is poverty. Since foreign aid sustains economic development, Albie of the Western Michigan University found in 2011 that a 1 percentage point increase in aid decreases poverty by 1.8%. Second, aid alleviates humanitarian crises. According to USAID in 2018, medical aid saves 3 million people per year by providing access to vaccines, and CF of the Washington Post further in 2017, our food aid helps 1.3 million people every single month escape starvation and keeps many developing countries from the brink of famine. Save these programs and negate the resolution.
That says we will always be able to borrow more money.
Yep.
We'll keep going.
Yeah,
So why aren't bailouts more likely in Europe?
because you can't do that in Europe.
Why?
They increase the debt by promoting the economy.
No, the resolution is in the present tense, correct?
Yeah.
So it says that we should prioritize it now, but it doesn't mean we should always prioritize it 100 billion years into the
Well,
future.
both of us have talked about bailouts in the event of a recession. That's the only place where bailouts happen, right? But there's no recession right now, but we should think about what happens during a recession, because that's where the bailout argument,
Okay, that's
what the
fine.
bailout argument pertains
2008.
to.
So we're saying we have to reduce debt right now, and then when a recession comes, then we can bail out the banks, right? The resolution's in the present tense asking us to pay now. But
Do you have a
So, but during recessions, in your world, we cannot have bailouts, because the bailout definitionally prioritizes economic growth over
Yeah,
reducing
but the
debt.
resolution doesn't say we should always prioritize debt over economic growth 100 million years in the future. It says that we should do it now, and we're arguing that we should do it now in order to prepare.
Pretty sure you said
for the
recession is
oncoming
happening in like
What?
2 years, which is not
Huh?
138 years.
Huh?
You said like a recession is coming soon, it's not
Okay,
138
no, we also say that recessions happen in the long term, right? There's always going to be a cycle of recession and economic growth.
Sure.
That's why we say that we have to do it now.
I
in
think the
order to focus on
resolution
the long
is
term.
asking us to debate overall when
No.
the government has
No,
problems.
then what do we do when we don't have debt? Do we just like keep prioritizing reducing debt? That doesn't make any
That's
sense,
kind of
right?
silly, because we're always going to have some debt.
I mean, wait, what?
There will always be some debt.
Okay, so like this is a resolution, like that is a really unrealistic scenario, but do you have a point?
That we have debt.
No, it's a really unrealistic scenario that the like resolution wants us to debate, like if we always prioritize debt 100 years in the
And I
future.
feel like debate topics debate arguments often pertain to events outside of the status quo, like both parties.
No, it's in the present tense, we're saying you have to prioritize now, but do you have a point?
Yeah, so you said that global recessions harm the world poor.
Yeah, why? Why do global recessions? Because there's less foreign investment, banks collapse and stuff like
So
that?
who's investing in the global poor right now?
Like investors,
So like, who is investing in like agrarian Rwanda or Eritrea right now?
wait, what?
So you said that the global poor get less investments during recessions. So my question is there any investment right now for the global poor?
I guess there is, right? Like, I'm sure people invest in developing countries, yeah.
That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like people may invest in India or China, but for the really poor countries like Rwanda, Eritrea, like Laos,
Sure.
no one is investing there.
Sure, I would argue that economic growth in China and India can be used as a model for other countries, right? For example, because U.S. companies invested so much in China and India, and they had the ability and the willingness and the profit and the profit to invest in China and India, that's why they did it in the first place. I would argue that that model can be applied to other countries, and you don't give me a
Is it
reason
being
why.
applied?
Huh?
Is it being applied?
I wouldn't know, but like I'm pretty sure it is. Right?
I don't
Other
think it
companies always want to make a profit.
Insofar
Our
as
argument is that when you
countries
increase the profit of a company, that lends them to take more risks, right? When they take more risks, they try to invest in areas that are growing.
I don't think just because you have more profit means you take more risks.
Yeah, I think you do, right? Because then you're willing to take more risky investments because your bottom line isn't on the line.
Even if you had more money, would you invest in a risky country?
If I had more, like
why would you just
I mean,
invest in
I
a
don't
stable
know.
country?
I mean, if I was Warren Buffett, probably.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Oops, hold on.
Horace will be weighing the views everybody ready to go? Our impact from recessions always comes first. This is because we tell you that if recession happens, it underlines the last 20 years of economic growth in the United States. But they're probably going to get up here and read some argument about how developing countries aren't actually benefited. This is blatantly false for two reasons. The IMF evidence in the bottom of our case literally tells you that after the 2008 recession, developing countries bear the burden the most. This is because they're dependent upon like foreign investment. Look to like China committing the One Belt, One Road initiative that literally proves that they're investing into developing countries right now. But secondly, and more importantly, Rousseau of DC and 15 writes that even if they take a year to recover, they're left in poverty for the rest of their life. This is because the kids who in these developing countries that experience the economic harms of a recession don't go back to school. They come home to help their families and grow their economic support. This means that ultimately in the long term it undermines any chance of development. They can't read any defense on that. But then on their first contention, 4 responses. First of all, Schwartz 18 of CNBC explains that as the American debt is rising, we have to pay increasing rate amount on our interest rates. This means that even if they want to increase the stimulus and bailouts, they literally will not have the financial capability to do so. This is what we tell you in our second warrant on our case. But even moreover, secondly and more importantly, overheating is in their world. Cox 18 of Bloomberg finds that the American economy is being stimulated at an unsustainable rate. The warrant behind this is clear, because when you're overstimulating one sector of the economy, it leads to a bubble. What happens when that bubble goes away is what we saw in the 2008 recession. That's why Labonte of the CNBC in 2018 explained that every single recession since World War II has been a direct result of overheating. Don't let them try to solve a problem that their world created in the first place. But then, thirdly, Quartz explains that even if the United States government tried to stabilize the economy during a recession, they literally do not have the ability to do so. This is because the interest rates right now aren't high enough to stimulate any economic growth. The only risk of solvency comes from the affirmative. Our case is literally a prerequisite to their first contention. But then, on their second contention, we can see the link's 6 impact terms. First, recognize that my opponents never give you a single reason why the aid has to come from the United States. In fact, Josiah of Georgetown University finds that given the current trajectory, not prioritizing humanitarian assistance, private and NGO aid is eclipsing aid from the public sector. When aid is prioritized in the public sector, the private sector is displaced from providing aid. As a result, Kaufman of Brookings Institute explains that a 10% increase in humanitarian aid from the public sector decreases third-party action by 6.2%. This displacement happens for 3 reasons. First is complacency. As NGOs grow more in both funding and support in response to government inaction during a humanitarian disaster, conversely, while Americans increase their actions, third parties believe that the problem is taken care of and disengage. The second is displacement, as volunteer organizations that operate in developing countries are consistently denied the ability to act or are pushed out of nations that we intervene in. The nations attempting to take control of the situation obstruct the distribution of private aid. Third, NGOs retain a strong preference to stay isolated from governments and with their activities, but it also causes to avoid unnecessary audits with the bureaucratic procedures. Thus, when state actors target refugees, it ultimately leads to private sector volunteers. But donations from the NGOs also decline because complacency by individual actors. Plain of the University of Toronto explains that every $1 in government aid disputes, it decreases private donations by $1.50. This is preferable for 3 reasons. First, Desai explains that private aid circumvents corruption and leakage because it doesn't have to deal with the inefficiency of bureaucracy in the developing world. The second is because the United States suffers political polarization and bureaucratic red tape, which means it takes longer to act in the first place. The third is that our overall Cox of the University of Wales finds that resources used to reset a refugee program could be used in an entire village at the grassroots level. They crowd that out. But then go up to the warrants level that they give you with the framework. 3 responses. First, on their bond, their first warrant is not true. Our good kind evidence literally says that as the proportion of bond sales is going down, this proves the international community doesn't trust America. Second, defaulting doesn't necessarily have to happen as a result of debt. And third, Quartz explains that we are on the next horizon of new financial investment.
Is everyone ready? It's going to start on our case. Start on foreign aid. They can see the links, which means voting for them decreases foreign aid. They tell you that's good because private aid is like better. The first point here, very simply, is that they say a 10% increase in public aid decreases private aid by 6%, which means on net there is more aid happening when the public sector invests, very simply. But on their reasons as to why private aid is better, they say first that private aid decreases corruption. They never explain why, other than it gets around bureaucracy, but if it's still going to governments that are corrupt, it doesn't get around bureaucracy. We think public aid is better for two reasons. First, The Economist explains that public aid has since been reformed such that only 6% of public aid is given in cash. You can't corrupt people by sending them apples. Second of all, Tavares of the University of Lisbon explains that because government aid comes with conditions for reform, every 1% increase in aid decreases corruption by 2%. That's the only empirical quantified analysis on the corruption argument. Then they talk to you about political polarization. Public aid is not subject to political polarization once public aid budgets are passed, because the State Department then decides how it's allocated and what it does with it, which is why there's no political polarization. We think that we outweigh on clarity of impact on our arguments of public aid, because we tell you that public aid saves 1.3 million lives every single month just from what the American government gives out. They can't give you any quantified numbers for private aid. The other reason we think that public aid is better is because public aid is immune to economic shocks. NGOs, corporations, whatever, when there's economic shocks, when there's minor volatilities, they can't give as much aid, and their aid fluctuates, but the U.S. government does not. Go to their case. First, 5 reasons why we outweigh. We think first that the global poor are the most important impact around because their poverty is much more severe. They don't have the same social safety nets that we have in America. And every dollar of poverty alleviation can go further there than it can bailing out the United States economy because the incomes there are lower. Second of all, the global poor are relatively sheltered from foreign aid shocks. This makes sense because your average subsistence farmer in a random developing country is not trading on global food markets. That's why Arias of the St. Louis Federal Reserve found that developing countries rebounded the fastest after the 2008 recession, rebounding within a year. Their arguments impact the developing world for literally 1 year. In contrast, Mold of the OECD explains that American aid does not fluctuate when recessions happen because we just take on more debt to fund it. This is really critical because they concede the third reason in our observation about why countries are going to continue buying American debt because we are the global reserve currency and they need to get their hands on as many American bonds and dollars as possible, which means we can always take on more debt to fund our budget when there is a recession. Thirdly, we think that the existence of a recession, as far as their impacts to the developing world, matter far more than the severity of recession, because the existence of a recession pulls out investment from the developing world. First, they don't explain to you why the severity of recession increases impacts to the developing world. Fourthly, Gerson on the Washington Post explains that while, as they say, recessions are inevitable, we think that we should look to the severity, and foreign aid drastically reduces the severity. The last recession was 31 million people out of poverty. They don't explain to you the incremental impact of more severe recession. Fifth, we think that aid is more targeted. When you talk about growth, when you talk about developing countries like China, we are not talking about the global poor in developing countries like China, or the global poor in other poor countries like Rwanda or Eritrea, where there isn't as much American investment and therefore they're more sheltered. But aid is more targeted. It goes directly to the most vulnerable people, whereas the growth they talk about does not. Go into their case. They first say a recession's coming. We don't think that matters insofar as the recession is going to be minor. The Economist explains that since 2008, the banking system has reformed, generating much more stability. That's why Craig of the South China Morning Post explains the next recession is expected to be minor at worst. Then they say that bonds are bonds increase stability or whatever. We think that as they said themselves in rebuttal, we are in a corporate debt bubble that is problematic because we are overheating and interest rates need to rise. Thankfully, they also said that taking on more debt raises interest rates, which literally solves the recession they're talking about. So when you vote for us and take on more debt, you solve the recession problems that they say are going to lead us to recessions. Then they talk about interest rates like taking up all of the spending. That doesn't count for raising the debt ceiling like we say that you can always do. Ready, Cross?
Yeah.
All right, you have a question over here.
At the point in which you don't respond to the IMF or Rousseau evidence, why did your 5-burden overview matter?
Because the existence of a recession, your evidence is talking about the existence of a recession, but I'm saying that your argument is talking about the severity of recession.
No.
So, yes, you say recessions are
No. Rousseau directly looks at the effect on developing countries after the
No,
Great
I understand.
Recession.
But your evidence is saying that major recessions hurt developing countries. Your argument is saying that you make recessions less severe.
No,
So-
not at all.
All right, so
The
what is
Rousseau
your
evidence? Literally
I'm not.
says
I understand what your Rousseau evidence says. It says that recessions are bad.
No.
Your argument says that you are going to decrease the severity of recessions. The reason why that's important is because if you don't show the increase of severity of a recession to impacts on the developing world, your argument has no place in this round. Can I ask you a question?
Hold on, you literally concede in your first contention that the next recession is going to be worse than the Great Depression.
No, I just said the worst outlook for probability of a recession is now.
Wait, so in second cross you're changing your advocacy from
No.
like the next recession is going to be
I can read you what we wrote in case. It said worst outlook, not worst recession. It said worst outlook for probability.
Alright,
I can read it to you now if you really care. Alright, cool, I do have a question. So, on recessions, do you have any evidence as to A, how much more severe stuff would get, and B, how that severity in the United States impacts the developing world?
yeah, we say it takes twice as long for countries involved to recover.
No, your evidence says it takes twice as long for America to recover.
No, because when it takes twice as long for America to recover, then the people who are investing from America into the developing world probably takes even longer.
Alright, cool. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, let's talk about like your third like warrant that you say we can see. What about the court's evidence that says
Third
now
warrant that we can see. Yes, sorry.
the third warrant in your framing that
Yeah.
I read the
Reserve
court's I read the court's evidence that postdates yours that literally says because America has such a high debt, we're like China's yuan and Europe's euro are actually competing with the United States for the reserve currency.
Alright, but they're not going to get there because the reserve currency is so intertwined in how the economic system works that you can't just change it because you feel like the U.S. is
Then
too much
why
debt.
are sales in bonds decreasing?
Because they're decreasing since 2008. We took out a lot of bonds in 2008 because we had a recession. As the economy
Yeah,
recovered, we
as
took
the
out less
debt
bonds.
grew exponentially.
Yes.
That is literally the
Alright,
warrant.
I'm just saying
telling
it
you.
makes a lot of sense that the amount of bonds we took out decreased since the recession as our economy
No.
recovered. Because we
Foreign-
need less bonds when the economy is growing.
Foreign purchasing of bonds has
Yes,
declined
that's
since
my point.
2008.
It makes sense because we have been issuing less bonds since 2008.
Okay, even if that's true, that still
That is
proves the inherency that America is slowing down, and it's not this great
No, it doesn't.
What?
I explained to you, I gave you an alternate causality for why the bond sales are decreasing. Because we are issuing less bonds. So it
Okay.
doesn't mean that we're becoming more unstable.
Okay, A,
You're
you'd
just
like to
showing
see
a
piece of
correlation,
evidence that
but you
says
don't
that.
interact with the warrants in our case, which is that very simply, countries cannot stop buying American debt whenever we ask for it because we are the global reserve currency.
Do you see that evidence?
Yeah.
And I'm going to take credit.
Yeah, tell us that.
Power running.
Sorry,
Is it the Orion or is it which one?
it's the tell us that.
Yeah, can you like highlight the part?
So the highlighted line in yellow and the highlighted in my cursor is the.
Thanks. We'll keep going. Okay, here you have it. Pause prep. We have to use 24 there, we'll keep it. Okay, 1 minute 33 minutes
talk to me? Alright.
I have some napkins in my pocket there, so you don't want to.
Yeah, I'm good. Okay, so, overview 4 and 8 this session. Is everyone ready? On their first overview about how people are just going to loan America more money, first off, they don't respond to good kind, which co-states their evidence that they just showed us. It says specifically that people who are buying American bonds are decreasing, which is really important, which means that we can't just borrow forever. Then they say that no one's going to let us default, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people won't just lend us more money. In a recession, we need as much money as possible to recover, so we still gain a net benefit. Then they say, we concede like their third thing. That doesn't make any sense. We respond with the court's evidence, which is very specific, that says the U.S. dollar is actually competing with the yuan and the euro for global primacy, which means that the U.S. dollar is no longer the global currency. Then on foreign aid. First off, recognize that public aid is not better. The cost card from the University of Wales is very specific. It says that in the cost it takes a public aid to settle one refugee family, private aid could have settled one whole village. That's really important because we tell you that private aid is better than public aid through the Mossad evidence, which says that private aid is direct to the people rather than public aid, which gives it to the government. But secondly, the Dietrich of Princeton card says that private institutions actually have better local knowledge of the region. That's why their aid is better. But then we tell you that overall, it doesn't matter if there's more money in public aid, it's quality over quantity. But then, let's go on to recessions. The first thing they say is that developing countries rebound after 1 year. The problem is you can look to our IMF evidence from case, which tells you that recessions mean that poor countries are falling way behind rich countries in their development. Our IMF evidence is very specific. It says that recessions cause more inequality because poor countries fall behind. Even if you don't buy that, the Rousseau evidence for a bottle says that right now, when you have a recession, children leave their families and educations to go find a job. That's really important because that's why Rousseau concludes that overall recessions have long-term impacts that you can't quantify. But then they say that number of recessions outweigh. The problem is they never respond to our overheating thing. We tell you from Bloomberg that they would actually overstimulate the economy because the economy is growing right now. They would actually outpace demand would actually outpace supply, and they would overheat the economy. But then they say that the next recession isn't going to be is going to be minor. The problem is we're not just talking about the next recession. We're talking about the long term. When more and more recessions happen, we need to reduce our debt to pull out. Then you can extend our warrants. The first one we tell you is about bonds. We need as much money as possible in a recession. Then you can extend shorts, which tells you that when you increase the cost of interest costs, then you can't fund recession recovery anymore, which is why you have to pull the trigger for an app.
Alright, one more time.
We took a minute 55, we're 2 o'clock. Alright, cool. That was a minute 20. We have 50 seconds left.
Is everyone ready? Okay. Let's start on Sasha's wing. Wait, what is this? His wing. Yeah. So this debate comes down to 2 levels of weight. The first is recessions versus foreign aid. They make a big mistake when they concede that global poor come first, because they have no social safety net. This is important because the global poor does not mean developing countries. China is a developing country, but the global poor are not there. The reason this is important is going to be a couple of weighting mechanisms down the line. The second thing, they try to respond by saying recessions mean countries fall behind and people fall into poverty. But Arias responds to this saying that developing countries actually rebound in just 1 year, meaning their impacts are only 1 year long. Here's the warranting that Sachin gives you. That developing countries are not really connected to the global economy, which is why recessions don't really impact the global poor very much, because the global poor are not involved in international trade. Finally, this is important. Both teams have agreed that recessions come in another world. The existence of recessions is not unique. The reason that's important is that they don't get any weighing, because they don't decrease the severity of recessions. Insofar as recessions happen in another world, only aid decreases the severity of recessions by giving food and assistance to those who actually need it the most. Finally, we would contend that aid is a better mechanism of poverty alleviation than just general economic growth and investment, because aid is specifically targeted to the global poor, not just investing in countries. An investor is going to invest in developing countries, will invest in China and India, not Rwanda and Eritrea, where the global poor are. Aid helps the global poor, investment does not, and the global poor come first. So how do we link in? We link in through our aid argument. Both teams agree that when you vote for my opponent, aid decreases. They just say that private aid is better. They drop two pieces of weighing here as to public aid is superior. First, public aid is immune to any shocks in the economy, meaning that if the economy fluctuates, private aid can go up and down. Government aid is not vulnerable in that way. But second, we outweigh on clarity of impact, as CF from our case explains, public aid specifically saves 1.3 billion people each month with food alone. This is important because they don't tell you, besides one village versus one refugee, how many people private aid actually saves when you vote for us. The public aid saves 1.3 billion per month. Remember that aid always comes before recessions because aid is targeted, growth is not.
Yep. No, first question over here.
Let's talk about this argument. At the point in which I preemptively read a card from Rousseau that says, yes, their economy recovers, but in the long term, they're never actually going to increase sustainability, sustainable growth. This is because the kids who are in a developing country. This is because the kids in a developing country have to come home and they never go back to school. At the point in which that is true, and you can see that, how do you say that growth gets better in the world?
If the economy recovers, then why is there still all
No, what's really important is that your definition of recovery is very different, right? Because we say from the IMF evidence that recovery doesn't actually occur. In fact, their growth is actually much slower than developed countries. That's why inequality has been increasing with recession.
This gets back to the issue I was pointing out in second cross, and we've been pointing out in our speeches, which is that you don't explain why the severity of a recession impacts the local poor. You explain why the existence of a recession impacts the local poor, but you only talk. You only talk about decreasing the severity of a recession. Insofar as that's true, we tell you that aid helps countries recover from recession, reduce the severity of recession. That's why in the last recession, they lifted 31 million people out of poverty, out of the people that were pushed into poverty.
Right, okay.
Which
So
means that
here's
insofar as
what's
people
really
get pushed in
important.
either way,
You do not
because
respond to
recessions
the
happen in either
overheating
world.
turn. You do not respond to the overheating turn at all.
The
We tell you
overheating
when
turn
you
was a
make...
turn for us, because you
No.
said it's overheating because of low interest rates,
No.
and you said debt
No, we
increases
literally
interest
never
rates.
talked about interest rates in our case. I don't know where you got interest rates from. But
our
our
first
overheating
and
turn
third
is,
response
hang on,
to
our
our first
overheating turn
response.
is very important because it says that right now the government, or the economy is growing. But when you overstimulate the economy like you're advocating for on the next side, that leads to overheating and more investment causing more bubbles.
We didn't advocate for any stimulation or overstimulation.
That's what you're prioritizing economic growth over reducing
No,
debt.
we're
That's
prioritizing
stimulation.
the SQUO, not.
Okay, fine.
And
And
that's
this
literally
will.
what the Cox card says.
Alright,
We're reaching
so just to be clear,
unsustainable growth.
why is the growth unsustainable?
Okay, this is because what we tell you in rebuttal and what Oliver sends that you never respond to. We say that when you overstimulate one sector of the economy, investors see that economy, that sector, is probably not going to get much more out of it.
I'm just asking why anything is overstimulated in the first place, not how some overstimulation leads to more overstimulation.
Can I finish?
I mean, you guys didn't even respond to it.
Am I gonna finish or? Alright, I'm gonna ask a question since obviously you're not gonna let me finish. Let's talk about aid. At the point in which we give you the comparative analysis about one person to one village, why is governmental aid better?
Well, we give you two reasons. The first is because it's immune to economic
Can you
shocks.
contextualize economic shocks?
Alright, so if the stock market goes up or down, the corporations might have less money, they might have to
Corporations though, NGOs are not
NGOs are reliant on private
UNICEF is
donors,
not a
it's the same thing.
corporation, right?
It doesn't, well, first of all, you talk about corporate donations, but also these
That's one of
NGOs
them.
are reliant on private donations anyway, so fluctuations for private companies impact NGOs.
Wait, but when the economy decreases, the U.S. cuts money to foreign investment.
No, they don't. That's the evidence that we read that says that historically, they stayed constant through recessions.
We'll start there.
comes with winning. Remember what they drop in every single speech. We tell you that right now when you have a recession, it undermines any economic growth, which is incredibly important because their second contention says that any form of like a governmental humanitarian aid is a form of economic growth, meaning that it literally undermines what they are talking about. But secondly and more importantly, you prefer this over their argument about shocks because they don't ever contextualize what a shock looks like or how often they're going to occur. If anything, these shocks link better on our side because we tell you overheating increases in the neg world because you're overstimulating one sector of the economy. When you overstimulate one sector of the economy, the government is not able to actually recover from the lack of investment into other sectors, which bursts the bubble. But then, even more specifically, they drop the quartz evidence that we extend in every speech so far. This tells you that right now, China in the UN and Europe in the euro are actually on the horizon of catching up to America for the global reserve currency. This means the inherency is everything for the app. But then, on to foreign aid. They make a crucial mistake because we tell you comparatively, even if the government aid is like 10%, but the private aid is 62.2%, there's two reasons it's comparable. First is because we tell you it's more specialized and goes to the people, and they also know like the people better, and they understand the institutions. But the second is because you don't have to go through bureaucracy, and as a result, it impacts more people. You prefer this over their wing because we tell you private investments and private private help for humanitarian aid is substantially better. But then go on to recessions. They drop overheating. You can completely extend that for us. At the point in which they do that, and they also drop the IMF and the Russo evidence, is a clean app ballot. Because we tell you right now, when a recession happens in America, developing countries specifically and the poor countries specifically feel the most burden. We solve in two ways. The first is bonds. We tell you that if bonds are going down, if the bond sales are going down, we need to have as much money as possible to ensure confidence with the investors. The second is on stimulus, which they also never touch. We tell you that because the investment is too much money, they won't have money to actually fund stimulus. At the end of the day, app is the only one with impact.
50 seconds, we're on it.
By 25%. That's why for every $1 increase in infrastructure spending, you get $3 of economic output. That ultimately means that all of your spends go away. But then they talk about poverty, they talk about transportation. You tell you two things. One, you prioritize public transportation. That's what infrastructure does. That levels the playing field. We're not just building highways for rich people. We're also increasing public transportation, which is bad for everyone. They need to tell you why that's bad. We're going to be second impact on inequality. Penny, Austin, Davis, and CNC. All of this ones aren't competed. At this point, what we would tell you is if you prioritize infrastructure spending, you are penny your evidence. You clearly indicate that there would be a direct way to use this in these people with all these jobs. Right off the bat, we would tell you at penny concludes that although the debt is associated.
All right, very good. Start on when. Both sides have agreed that impacts to the global poor matter the most. The problem is, they never articulate how they get to the global poor. Both sides have agreed that the existence of a recession is non-unique. No matter what, the same number of recessions will occur. They argue that they will decrease the severity of a recession. The problem is there is a large disconnect between their argument and their evidence, because their evidence is all about how the existence of a recession is problematic. We think that only the severity of a recession matters, given that both sides have agreed the existence stays the same. We give you evidence that aid decreases the severity of a recession, taking 31 million people out of the last recession, out of poverty. We give you a reason why the increased severity of a recession in America does not increase the severity of a recession in the developing world, and that's because either way, those are the investments that they first pull out, and those investments are not targeted anyway. We also say that even if you buy the recession's argument, the developing world rebounds in 1 year, and after the 2008 recession, from 2009 onward, they grew at a rate of 50%. Obviously, that means that their arguments are very, very short term. We also think that even if you buy that their arguments are long term, we are talking about targeted aid. That's different than growth, which just grows the economy as a whole, but will not help the global poor who aren't trading on foreign markets. What helps the global poor is giving them food when they are starving. Prefer our argument over theirs because we're the only ones that give you warrants. Go to our argument about foreign aid. We both agree that public aid goes down if you vote for them. We've also both agreed that public aid saves 1.3 million lives every single month just from food aid. Their only response to this is that private aid is better. But they ignore the weighing that Ethan and I do, which is that private aid goes away when there are small market fluctuations because they are dependent on market stability. It doesn't matter how specialized the aid is if the access is temporary and not guaranteed. Access to aid is the most important issue in the round. That's why when we tell you we're saving 1.3 million lives every single month, that's a clear way to vote for us. A, because it's the only argument they're developing for, but B, just some clarity of impact. There's nowhere else where you see a quantified impact and a clear link story.